Well, it has finally come about that on the day of the week for going to the board, there's at least one person who would not be able to make it. So a session has been postponed. Leave everything nice and hanging ominously in the middle of the Hell War. To return eventually, whenever. Probably well on into start of next year. Which means it's time for thinking. It's time for spreadsheets. Time for thinking music. Let's get to theorizing. So, previous session of Having a Think was all about the Monarch phase, about survival and succession and the worst case scenarios for dynasties and how to get out of them. One point of consideration that I didn't run through during that live session, but did shortly afterwards. The consideration of how much of a hit to your stats you're getting for, Baby King happening for the up to 3 years of child stat penalty. Well, 3 turns of child stat penalty versus the one-off but larger stat penalty for a usurper, which scales with how good the usurper is, since it's just half your numbers. And the way that seems to work out is, in the case of a bad usurper, you'd rather have a bad team. That's less of a hit. This is cumulative across all the stats together, these minuses. So that's the -1 off everything for teen, -2 for child, -3 for baby, and so on down. But in the case of child, you're losing similar amounts of value, hypothetically, to your mediocre 666 all-hail usurper. In the case of baby, baby is big ol' hit to your everything. So, depending on the particulars of the situation, like if on the exact first turn after the succession, there's something you really need to do, then this -9 at the moment is less bad than the -15 the usurper is suffering. But, starting the next turn, the usurper is up to full power, supposing they survive their succession, survival check. Whereas the baby is still slowing you down. And then, overall, by the time the baby has gotten up to speed and adulthood, the usurper has pulled ahead. In terms of sum of stats over turns, supposing, just supposing that's in any way a useful metric. Who knows? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Anyway, a lot of the thought that came out of this is that there's definitely shape to the numbers, there's texture to the numbers, there's a bunch of signs of things and how these numbers fit together. However, 1d10 with, you're probably never going to see more than a 2 modifier to it is extremely swingy. So all these profitabilities are very small condolences when it is just a fact that you could always drop back to a 333 and just be at the bottom. And that 333 could survive a dozen years, just on sheer gumption. Also went ahead and took those survival curves there. Just made some nice graphs of them. Just, there's what your... I call it life expectancy here. It's more risk of death? Death expectancy. Survivability factor? When you're just making up metrics, you can call them whatever you want. But yeah, under normal situations, there's your neutral curve and your various more heavily penalized curves, where you can see that regular survival arcs slow enough that it takes a while for it to make its way down. It's pretty even. You can hardly tell that that's an exponential curve. It looks almost like a straight line when you're zoomed in this much. But the moment you start piling some pluses on there, the arc becomes much more pronounced. Starts lower, drops faster, approaches 0 pretty nicely. And yeah, a 333 being the worst available here on the board game is analogous to a 000 in the PC games, generally. Well, starting at 4, they kind of shifted all the stat numbers to the left, so that 0 was now the worst. I think as late as EU3, 3 was the baseline, and 9 was the best you would see. Whereas that became more of a 3 to 6 scale. 3 to 6. In Euro 4. And after a crisis, even on normal, that spike to survivability at the start is pretty noticeable. Usurpers are prone to having their coup counter-couped by somebody. You live by the sword, you die by the sword, as you do. Yeah, the idea for later Euros being like, okay, a 0 score to indicate that it's the worst is still giving you some amount of baseline utility. They just migrated that over so you think about your ruler stats in terms of the absolute scale of everything. And so with that settled, we could move forward in the old chronological order. Wherein I'd already gone ahead and done a little bit of the old number thinking, just incidentally week to week on the side, about events. I have a moment here to point this capture. Over at, let's see, where are you in this whole list? Open documents. The economy. Fools. And I could just put away the Monarch spreadsheet there. Here's economy. The economic event table, pretty straightforward to think about. I did speak about it a bit during the last Think session. Of like, okay, there's your 10 by 10 grid, where you're rolling for a column and rolling for a row, and so just every cell has an even chance of showing up, and the odds of events happening are just based on how frequently they show up in that table. And so as of when I counted these all up at some point years ago while getting all the information digitized, so possibly there's a couple points of error somewhere in here, but yeah, here they all are. All of the events, I've color-coded them here by generally good events and generally bad events, and applied a bit of relevant context just to twist some of them. But so yeah, 3 most common events, all ranking at 5% each: fiscal evasion, tech advance, and exceptional year. At 4%, agricultural crisis. At 3%, excellent ministers, looting, corruption, military leader, sale of titles, epidemic, poor weather, and deflation. And then over at 2%, naval losses, discovery of mines, obscurantism, pirates, warships, drought, rush of colonists, refugees, scandal, plots, defections, enthusiasm, renewed popularity, the other enthusiasm, agricultural development, conquistador, explorer, governor, diplomatic preeminence, cultural expansion. And then the rare events, madness, sickness, gift, which is the same as sale of titles entirely, so I don't know why both of these events exist. They are completely identical. as of the last time I checked on them. We can go ahead and look at it again. Over here, they're in here somewhere. Yeah, sale of titles, roll D100, result is amount of cash added to treasury, place new total in box 2. And gift to the state is roll D100, this is an amount of cash added to your treasury, place total in box 2. They're the same event. They're entirely identical, they do the same thing. Why do they both exist? There's not the slightest bit of a tweak to even just tiny bit differentiate one from the other. They're the same. The event's the same. It's weird. Anyway, death of an heir, depletion of a mine, new ally, desertions, death of a leader, inheritance, offer of marriage, offer of alliance, independence of vassal, reorganizing army or fleet, crisis, boom, rectification, and treachery, which is a good event because it's treachery of an opponent in your favor. It's espionage. Several of these events have had a chance to come up during the Grand Campaign. Others have not yet. Yeah, either sale of title should have some kind of drawback, or gift is one or the other is stronger or weaker. Or if they're exactly the same, they shouldn't be two things. That's just wasted text. Or right away, I would think maybe sale of titles would be on the list of things that cause bonus corruption to the Ottomans. Which, by the way, I have written down here. So there's, I think it was 3 events that cause bonus corruption. Or no, it's just 2. It's fiscal evasion and corruption. Those both corrupt pashas. There's an 8% chance of pashas getting corrupted every turn for the Ottomans. In general, 57% of the board here is good stuff. 43% of the board is bad stuff. And that's before trying to factor in the fact that some of these events will be benign if they happen at the wrong time. They'll just end up being something that either a nominally beneficial event that wasn't useful to you in the current context, like rectification if you're not engaged in an arms race, or treachery when you're at peace, economic boom when you don't have any exotic resources, stuff like that. Or like naval losses if you had no boats, or pirates when that's something that affects everyone else. If you don't have rest of the world commerce for pirates to harass, and so this is a good thing for you because it's bad for everyone else. Italicized here gently, conquistador, explorer, governor, refugees, and rush of colonists. The purely colony-related events here, those are the ones that don't happen to Venice and Austria, and because they're all good things, that slightly bends the overall texture of the board. So that economic events are just slightly worse if you are Venice or Habsburg. I don't see why a player would choose to become Habsburg. They seem just worse than the Netherlands at everything. They just have less to do. They have fewer ways to interact with the board. It's weird. Why is this an option? Such are the mysteries. So yeah, just taken from note of that, 10% of the board is events that Venice and Habsburg reroll. And here, important derived value from all of this, the chance of poor weather happening on a given turn, which is 1 minus the chance of everyone rolling not poor weather. Works out to 16.7. Menacing. Perilous. Let me just quickly jam that in as a value and flip it over. Yeah, that's almost exactly 1/6 of all turns will have poor weather. Habsburgs have the benefits of being the emperor, except by the time the player can become Habsburg, that's like after the Reformation and the League War and the dissociation from Spain. The dissociation is required for the player to become Habsburg. You can be Austria after Austria has gotten stomped on a lot by recent events. Probably. Yeah, that's the economy award. There's not too much to say about it, just on its face, because of how it do. It's there. It's odds of stuff happening. It tends to be slightly good, although again, the fact that it's just kind of even distribution across all of this means it's a bit number wang. We have seen the double madness. It can happen. It will happen. It must happen. Madness every turn. I could consider, like, trying to drill down on each of these events and weighing out how much of an influence they have when they do come up. I don't see too much value in that, though. Or rather, there'd be more value in doing it in the context of these mechanics when we're looking at other parts of the game. When thinking about, like, tech as a system and how the arms race will generally be paced out. That's when the tech advancing events would be relevant to look into, alongside, like, your chances of having a good military leader, and how much either of those has an impact on your regular research, and catch-up bonuses and all of that. So that's the economy. Politics, though. Where I've already gone ahead and had a preemptive think about the political event table, and its own weirdness that has fascinated me since the moment I laid eyes upon how these work. So here's a generic event table, splayed out here, and filled in each of these places is the odds of each cell being struck. So, baseline, 40% of the time, you're starting in this column, and then 20% you're starting here, and then 10 each here, 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 or bonus. And then your second die is either starting here, well, it's starting here and counting down, and so that's distributing the odds of this column happening all the way down and then rolling over into the next column. And something that causes right away is the most likely event to happen is actually this one. When you're just talking about an initial open, raw grid where nothing has happened yet. This is the peak. This one over here, the 5-6-1, is more likely to happen because it has that 2 of over here and that 4 of over here that's wrapping around and coming over. Yeah, because also 1, 2, 3. These are all 8 cells tall, and you are only using 1 to 9 in order to take steps along these, because rolling a 10 on the other die is a reroll and some more bonus text. Which in turn breaks down over here. So for a given roll on the political events, you have an 81% chance of having a current event occur and no further shenanigans. And then 10% of the time you're in bonus zone for multi-ball. And that breaks out to 7% of the time you're just getting an extra event on the current table. 2% of the time you're going to the past, 1% of the time you're going to the future. Although those also get kind of compounded by the fact that you're pulling from this table 3 times in a row. 3, potentially 4 times if you've gone and procced that bonus event. Which really means a lot that is then difficult to describe. Because then the moment you start taking cells out of the table because you're depleting events, things get weird. Where, for example, down here, I at some point grabbed, I think this is the depletion that's on Period 1's event table as of recently in the Grand Campaign. Let me go grab the old physical slip of paper here, take a look at her. Yeah, that's Period 1. Mostly up to date, exactly up to date. Mostly up to date. Yeah. Oh, this is Period 1's event table from the moment before I figured out that I'd done one event wrong. This cell shouldn't be filled in. This is that fake 6 that was thought to be rolled, but in fact hadn't been rolled. 6-1 when it would have been 6-2 and very relevant. Yeah, so this, well, I'll just go ahead and put that back. But so with a spread of events already taken up like this, which seems pretty normal, since like the way the blank table is biased here is towards the top of each column, and then towards the left of the overall thing. So any given sample of random events taken out, any snapshot of an event table that's alive, should be generally clustered up and to the left. All the events down here at the bottom and on the right are the least likely to occur. Or rather, because of the wholesale depletion mechanic, they are weighted towards the back of the event table, whereas the more likely ones are weighted towards the front. And so, for example, after you have done that, well, I had the weightings for this spelled out, but then cleaned those up. It causes weird things to happen as far as how those get jumbled around. Because what's down here right now, this is not that. This is looking at the weightings for Period 3's event table, when the Swamp Hassling Index is going to come into play. The effect of Spain deciding to tax the Netherlands every turn, well, each turn that they have so decided, subtracting from the second die rolled on the event table here, meaning that it's gradually pulling all of the odds of stuff happening back up towards the top, so that now there's this 16% chance of this cell being hit, and then 8, and then a whole lot of 4s, and all the ones at the bottom here cannot happen off the top, actually. They're just completely ruled out because of those penalties. And that's as of Swamp Hazard Index 3, which I'm reasonably sure is going to climb to Index 4, because Doc is definitely hitting swamp taxes on turn 14. Yeah, turn 14. Once we get around to that in the depths of the Hell War. So that's going to crunch up even further. So I took that and cross-referenced it to up here, here's Period 3's raw event table. And all the stuff on it. Event 1 there is the Revolt of the United Provinces. So cross-referencing that to this, down here is how likely each of the 20 events that Period 3 has, because these event tables get very long. Well, Period 3 is also itself quite long. So a lot of these will have a chance to happen. Weirdly enough, 19 and 20 are more likely than all of events 12 through 18 here. And 8. It's weird. It's weird to think that these tables were probably manually constructed around some kind of reasoning, but still end up looking so arbitrary and so strange. Where, so yeah, for reference, in this current state of the Swamp Hazard Index has been revved up. Or wait, so this is the baseline. Yeah, these stats here are using the table normally with the regular odds over there. 22% chance of Swamp Hazard, and all of these other stats here, that the rest of these events are much less likely. Reasonably likely to occur, but not terribly so. And then down here, using the modified odds, United Provinces jumps up to 35. A couple of events disappear entirely from things that can happen immediately. They're just blotted out until such time as the United Revolt fires off, or enough higher events have been depleted to push those numbers down to them. Just in general, it steals probabilities from all over the board and siphons them over towards what's going on here. And also, that's not quite exactly Because this is out of the 81% chance of landing on the regular grid at all. So these odds are actually slightly... If we want to look in terms of absolute occurrence, that divided by that. It is Numberlang. Yeah, pop this down here as well. Yeah, so when you're considering that this is 22 out of 81, 27% chance of Swamp Revolt on one roll of the event table. And then with current Swamp Hazard modifier, 43%. And then, just to get a rough sense of it, because remember, 3 political events per turn. Yeah, should be 1 minus that to the 3. Or rather, 1 minus that. All together to the 3. Yeah, that makes more sense. So across all 3 politic events, or wait, no, though, that, though. So was that first more alarming result, in fact, correct? Yeah, because I'm dealing with this failing to occur twice. This failing to occur 3 times. And I want not that. That should be it. Yeah, the odds of not swamp thrice. Not swamp and not swamp and not swamp. And then negate those odds. So yeah, actually, as a baseline, 61% chance. See, normally you step into the Renaissance with another empire. You got a 50-50 chance of your realm shattering. And so on and so forth. 61% chance of Swamp Revolt on the first turn of period 3 if there were no swamp taxes. And after just 3 swamp taxes, 81%. Now, actually trying to adjust all of these odds would be a painstaking manual process. Unless I built, like, a much stronger automata to process these tables. Like, I would want to go out of the realm of spreadsheets and actually create a little tiny application with, like, an array containing the values in all of these cells and go about algorithmically plucking the events out of the structure and then assembling the results. But you know, not a bad way to spend an afternoon, if that's what you want to do. Could create the event simulator. The Eurobot. But an immediate read that I could take out of the fact that the baseline here for Swamp Revolution just immediately going off is already this high. There's no reason for Spain to not aggressively and without mercy crush the Netherlands for all it's worth. $50 a turn for 14 turns. That's a lot of ducats. Yeah, 700 ducats when I think Spain has been pulling off like 300 to 400 income on a given turn, probably something like that when conditions are good and you know, nothing particular has gone out of the way. Spain has been able to afford to throw large investments at a lot of things. Spain has colonizing money and arms race money and boat fighting money here in the early game. Yeah, going berserk on taxing the Netherlands is like 2 extra turns of income to throw around, distributed across the entire thing. That's a pretty big boost to the old GDP. Why wouldn't you? I suppose also from this, something that the event table accomplishes as an implement is that it nicely obfuscates how likely any given event is to happen on a given turn. You can kind of have a general gut feel of what's coming based on, like, which cells are more popular. Like, you can see, well, it'll be easier to see if I go ahead and brighten that up a bit. Or unmark it completely, probably. Well, it would be easier to see if I were more zoomed in on the spreadsheet, on the feed for those watching. But just go ahead and embiggen. Yeah, you can kind of see at a glance that there's a lot of 11s on this table and a lot of 1s. So you can know that those are probably in the high ranks for odds of happening on this table. And as it gets depleted, you can kind of look over it and see what's left and be like, alright, that's next. You can know that after this one has happened, this is inheriting those odds, and then this, and then this, and then this, and so on. Down the line. You can know that everything over here is more likely than everything over here. You can know that multi-ball could light at any time and throw all of your plans into disarray. But there's just a bit of smoke and mirrors between you and trying to actively game the event table at all. The effects of having a little number wang black box that will just spit out arbitrary occurrences is... As much as I would like to talk about how it's good to be able to plan around things, there can also be said to be value in needing to plan around chaos. And especially because this is a player versus player game. This is nominally competitive and adversarial. Everyone being on that equal footing of not being able to guess which way the wind will blow on a given turn does help create that shakeup. Especially when you need to be, say, making all of your plans and schemes and collaborations around the state of things one turn, and never knowing when the comet is just going to drop off the top rope and smash everything and drastically alter the situation. The main thing you can game about the event table is knowing which events are bad for your country specifically, and being able to note they've already happened at some point, and then feel safer. Because it will take the multi-ball to actually jump into the future and grab the next set of bad events for you. Like, that's a position I am in Period 2 right now. The Persian War and the Polish War were the main two kicks against the Ottomans on the Period 2 table, and they happened early, which was unpleasant when it happened, but then the moment that was over, it was like, okay, no more event hustle. That's already been handled. I can go start doing my thing elsewhere. and so forth. Thinking about events. Trying to break down any particular political event and talk about what it's able to do. That feels a bit out of scope for one of these sessions, and would inevitably go into spoilers once we start talking about events that haven't happened yet. Events that can't happen yet, shouldn't happen yet, but what if, and so forth. That feels like if I were to carry on further beyond talking about each mechanism in place, eventually maybe start doing a breakdown of the campaign timeline, and thinking about what each of these means for how a given country should play the game to take advantage of their events. There were a total of 7 events, well, 7 periods. 7 periods spanning 60 turns, and period 7 is actually kind of short compared to the rest. Like, the longest ones are in 3, 4, 5, 6. Somewhere in that general area. That would bring the subject down into Diplomacy Zone. And so, in particular, I could start with... It is weird that this has activation happening before influence. Because influence is definitely the stronger thing you think about in the diplomacy phase than activating your allies. It's weird that influence is after declarations of war, but also in a way I kind of get. Because you need to attack based on the stuff that you already have from last turn. There's some lag between improving your relations and getting new allies and getting to then throw them into a fight. No one has to worry about being sucker punched by a freshly established super ally. Only by being, like, reverse sucker punched by having a diplomatic upheaval steal your allies right before you were planning an attack. In which case you still have the opportunity to say, not attack because your allies have been stolen, and instead delay until you can rebuild your allies. There's no calling surprise witnesses. Which, on the subject then of diplomatic stuff, there's some math that I did a good ways back about diplomatic influence that I have had stored in the big ref for a long time. And I can go ahead and migrate it into a sheet of its own. Jump on over here into an untitled spreadsheet and then drop this grid, which sadly doesn't inherit any of the formatting that I had on it while it was in there, and looks like it dropped some values, actually, unless... Okay, there they are. Right, this hasn't been slimmed down to fit the data. Hold on. Go ahead and format you. And then give you a quick painting over. Okay, so what we got here, and I'll just go ahead and quickly kind of blue up the outer bits. Possibly for the sake of readability, for what might make it look more readable. Who knows? So this is math about rolling dice against a neutral or uninfluenced country. That whole do your influence check minus 2d10 and see what happens. That weirdness. Where with a die modifier of value up here, what are your odds of getting 0 or less, first of all? Gonna tag that in orange. Here's your odds of achieving fuck all. And then below that, your odds of getting 1, 2, 3, etc. Which I didn't like analytically produce these. I found a die rolling website that would give you bell curves on things and let it go to work. Because that's the thing, the moment you're talking about sums of multiple dice, you get bell curves instead of even distributions. You get the normals and all their shenanigans. And so the overall range here has been chosen based on 20 should be the absolute best you could possibly have on an influence check. I can just go ahead and spread that out on the table again right now. So if you have a 9 diplomacy monarch, you did a strong investment, gets you up to 14. You have this religious bonus here for 15. They are already in near top status. Takes it up to 18. They have a situational bonus to you, just like a natural affinity, which would take you up to 19. And then you have like a support action or an event bonus. 20 was a reasonable enough cap. A point to be like, no need to think about going any further than this line. Right, 20 is the point at which you can't fail to make progress. You're guaranteed to get at least 1. When you're rolling a d10 plus 20 against 2d10, you can't lose. You will get at least that 1 pip. There's almost no situation where that 1 pip will probably be of use to you if you've managed to achieve a 20 modifier. Just thinking about orbs. And yeah, I had this nice color coding going on. But I suppose I could quickly reproduce since it also kind of nicely step ladders along here. I just kind of put some bright green up here. Or over here, your 80% zone. And then down here, your worse than 20% zone. And then all between that, your whole mid-range. I'll just kind of put the 0 results up there in gray for now. Yeah, there we go. So, quick paint job there for visualization's sake. And then right down the middle. On each of these, there is somewhere that you have a full-on 50% odds of getting here. that was a nice magenta. So I have occasionally consulted this table during the campaign while thinking about who is worth trying to influence. Especially during turns where I've just had a garbage diplomatic monarch who could not negotiate to save their life. Okay, when I can only muster a 4-point modifier, what are my odds of getting anywhere? Is it a lost cause that I just shouldn't throw money after? And the answer is, at this low, probably. At a 6, you have a 50-50 chance of making any progress versus just failing. Right, that's how these numbers are phrased. This is the odds of getting at least 1, 2, 3, etc. Or if I then go ahead and quickly look over at the old diplomacy table on Big Ref here to get a sense of numbers. So obviously, for entry purposes, you only need a 1 to get from nothing to royal marriage. So starting from a diplomacy of 6, which you can get from you have an adequate diplomatic leader and you don't have a religion penalty against you. Coin flip on getting any progress, and, you know, slim odds of getting directly to subsidy or breaking through into alliance, where for a lot of countries, alliance costs 1 or 2. In fact, just going over the whole list here real quick, there is exactly 1 country for whom the alliance box costs more than 2, and it's Switzerland, who takes 7. Because Switzerland is just this immovable object, diplomatically, that will never take a side under any circumstances. So if you want it to go from nothing to alliance, you're looking for a result of 3 or 4 on your diplomacy check. And so that means, ideally, you leverage your way up to 9 or better, and then that's probably going to happen. That will work half the time. That's probably fine. Although, again, what the sheer size of this area should tell you, the thickness of it, is that, again, the particular dice trick that is in play here is very number-weighing. It's very high variance. Knowing expected or average payouts isn't especially useful when your possibilities are this broad. You can at least rule out what is impossible if you don't have enough modifier, although that's also quickly determinable at a glance, where your worst dice working against you is a 20 being subtracted. So, for example, yeah, at base, you're somehow rolling a diplomacy check at exactly a neutral die, and probably failing to accomplish anything. There's no way that that neutral die is going to be... Well, yeah, the maximum value of the neutral is mostly what bundles everything up into the top here. Your best case scenario is there's only 2 working against you from the friction, from the background noise. And so your best result on neutral die is an 8, where you roll a 10 and they roll snake eyes, and then nothing happens. Big takeaway from this curve, from this arc, is player versus player diplomacy is much easier to read, because it's 2 linear distributions and you're just thinking about whose number is bigger. If your numbers are even, it's a toss-up, and each number difference is a 10% slide in favor of whoever has that advantage. Probably? Although, you are, in effect, talking about... You are talking about the sum of two linear ranges, though. You're talking about the sum of two linear ranges, and then asking, is the result positive or negative? I think that also bell curves. That gives you the bubble. It's still more readable than this, though, when you're just against a kind of staggering amount of neutral friction. Remarkably large and remarkably variable. Numbers that were probably reached by just kind of experimentally nudging them around until they started producing results that felt right for whatever Phil's intended play experience was. Phil and whatever friends Phil convinced to help him test the game while it were being written. Could take a moment while we're here to talk about the specific levels of influence and what they all do. Since not much about those has come up during play beyond can I activate them or not. And it's been very lopsided who has had piles of allies to throw around versus who hasn't. And to some degree that has been dice driven rather than necessarily strategy driven. So marriage has its whole thing of you do this tiny little resolution to be sure that you're able to walk in here. Did you keep any pocket change on hand? What even are the largest dowries on the board? The lowest is a 2 for Switzerland? No, the lowest is a 0 for Ohio. They don't care. There is no royal marriage with Ohio. That is a complete non-entity. And let's see, the highest. Let's see, an 18 for Poland. Anyone beat 18? No. So did you keep pocket change on hand after doing your influences to pay for this? This seems very fringe. Eventually there will be situations where that $20 could be the difference between life and death. Possibly even at least once per campaign there would be a situation where someone is left choosing between paying this dowry and risking bankruptcy over something else. Being in a situation where they can't afford $20 because they need that further down the line to do something. Subsidy, much more impactful. With its whole much larger check where, let's see, I think the best subsidy value was on the range of -20. There is a -10 for the Pope. And for Persia. This weird roundabout backwards mechanic that is as one of the ways... It's one of the angles by which we get as close as we do to having NPC countries actually have their economies represented. their relative willingness and likeliness to throw out diplomatic cash or be in need of diplomatic support cash. Or even not necessarily will to pay out that cash, but instead, how likely are they to demand that somebody pay up in order to affiliate with them? Because, like, Poland has a -80 subsidy modifier. They owe you nothing. You owe them to associate with Poland. Prussia has a -70. You bring gifts when you talk to Prussia. Prussia doesn't need your attention. Always war. And the most extreme subsidy modifier in the other direction, Ohio has a -90. Ohio might, on rare occasions, give you one fur hat. That's it. You're already pushing your luck. Do not ask further. And this whole weirdness about, the bonus Pope cash, the $50 a turn for having an alliance with the Pope. That is tucked away in here for whatever reason. It's in subsidy, even though it's about what happens when you have an alliance with the Pope. It's weird. Plenty about how this PDF is assembled is strange. We found a couple of contradictions between it and the rules of the board as written in the original documentation. Be gotten to in time. So, alliance. This is the first point where having somebody in marriage and in subsidy doesn't do anything beyond just have your hooks in them officially and put them on your track and give you that little bit of leverage for trying to continue to move forward. They have a chance of giving you a bit of pocket change. Or demanding all of your pocket change. Or subsidy can cost very real amounts of money. Which in turn makes it weird that these only come up if you land exactly on those boxes, and it's very easy to boost past them onward into actually has a use for you. So, starting at alliance level, a minor country can use its basic force within its territory without limitation. If you are at war and have successfully activated the country, they can move one stack into a friendly or enemy province or sea zone that is adjacent to their own territory. And units belonging to the controlling country may move freely into the territory of the minor, providing the controlling country is at war. So yeah, there we go. Sitting here, you have military access through ally or better at all times. And starting here, you can activate them and get them to attack. I actually want to take this back and think about what an activation even means, though. Yeah, countries in alliance status or higher may be activated. Or battle. You make your activation attempts. Activated minors become at war with every country the controller is at war with, unless the minor was activated by event, and its controller has not performed a successful diplomatic action. Okay, so, thing we were mistaken about during the initiation of the Hell War. Activations are in general, they are not separately by war. the country is either awake or asleep, and you don't need to micromanage those separations. If they are asleep, they are out of the war and not in operation. That is still in play, where you can have that one-sided access from you have an ally who is technically neutral, but they're letting you slide through their territory to go on the attack, or allowing you to retreat back through their territory, trace supply lines, and so forth. And this exception here, if the miner was activated by an event and its controller has not performed a successful diplomatic action on it, or is already at war with the country the miner is at war with. Yeah, so that's part of the special status that a minor country goes into when it's assigned to a controller but hasn't been properly diplomed with. That whole separate war concept that exists. When you have a country that has been placed into your royal marriage box but behaves as though it were at entry to war, but has no real affiliation with you. That phantom status for a controlled neutral. That's all its own weird thing. But so anyway, starting at Alliance, you are allowed to activate a country just a little bit. Just a smidge. Move a whole one stack into somewhere that's immediately within reach and no further. Passively gain access. You receive no reinforcements at Alliance. They don't refresh their forces until they are at peace. You move on up to Expeditionary Corps. That one stack that they are willing to project out into the world now has the ability to move outside of national territory through friendly or enemy territory. They have to remain in Europe unless they are a minor country with colonies or trade posts. And Persia will only send expeditionary corps into Turkish or Mamluk territory or formerly Persian provinces. They still don't receive reinforcements at Expeditionary Corps. But they are now willing to kind of go a distance. And then so it's at EG and Vassal, when things properly kick into high gear and you have full operation. Oh, have points been activated? Points a thing now? Are people being offered incentive points? That weird system? Well, have fun with that. You have another number that goes up. It does things? Maybe. Numbers. There they go. They don't show up on the capture that I'm using for the stream here, but they function. Yeah, EG plus. This is when they start receiving reinforcements in logistics. And they may move all of their forces outside of their territory as long as they stay within 12 movement of their homeland. That's another number brought up. A good 2-year Earth orb that still doesn't have an alternate thing for it. Someday, perhaps in the next year. So yeah, the 12 movement point limit traced over land unless you have boats, in which case you can trace over water at a cost of 2 movement per sea zone. I like this mechanic. I like this bit. That every NPC country has an operational range that it will stay within. That's a good limiter for the places that have vassal swarms, such as myself. That I can't just completely snowball with the pile. The sheer magnitude of the pile gives me a lot of resources and a lot of options, but for any given opponent, I can only leverage some portion of the pile in their direction. And it does kind of change the whole picture of what I am working with in order to go in any given direction. That's neat. And then Diplo-Annex. The annexed country's forces are removed from play. Receive income as for your own, including manufacture percentage income. Including 4 manufacture percentage income. You may build units there, etc. It's annexation. This territory is now yours. Can only happen if they are adjacent to territory you already control. Either by land border or by coastal sea zones through which you can trace a path. If you were in a position where you could annex, but don't have that link, you instead go to vassal. That did come up once. You can be de-annexed by event, upheaval, or opposing diplomatic influence. This is real rude. You might think that Diplo-Annexation would be more permanent, but no, just with an ordinary diplomacy check, I can force you to spend defensive money, which you might not have. Because I know it's been the case for me a lot of turns, and it's probably also been the case for a lot of the other players, that if you're in the middle of a war, you're spending, like, all of your money fighting, and not keeping that much money to carry over into the next turn. Like, inflation exists as a mechanic to also, like, discourage, gently, stockpiling too much gold from turn to turn. So at the top of any given turn, during diplomacy, which is happening before you receive your fresh income, diplomacy has to be done with your leftover money from last turn's fighting, plus or minus whatever you may have earned from events or from negotiating with other players, who are also working with only their leftover money from last turn. You now need to make the call of how much are you going to try to spend on influence versus how much you hold back for defense in case someone decides to hassle you with their diplomatic actions. Because, like, if I start going around finishing annexing a bunch of the countries in my current vassal swarm, each of those could at any time be stabbed by an opposing diplomat to try and rile them up and pry them out, and I'm now in a situation where I might need to try to spend a bunch of cash in order to fight over, like, a 2-tax base chunk of North Africa. Which is not great economy for the coinage. And remember, with the way that opposing influences work, if you don't resist at all, then it goes to neutral immediately. Opposing influence is vicious. You need to put up at least basic resistance, or it effectively succeeds automatically. It's got some real teeth. Hostile influence. Diplomatic antics. Espionage, really. Espionage and diplomacy is the same. As you're above the table and you're below the table, it's the same table. Embassy is spy house. Everyone knows this. Everyone accepts this. That's the rules. But yeah, annexation being fragile. At least if you do it up here in diplomacy, it's fragile. If you are Russia or the Ottomans and you militarily conquer places, then you get to RFG them and then they're protected from this, except for the case of events that can explicitly take a country back out of RFG and put them back on the table. Yeah, effectively what this does is implement cores. This and a couple of other things implement the concept that would become core territory in the computer games. That even after you do this integration of the regimes, the local identity is still there. Of the people and of the aristocracy and of business and of everything that's in that region. There's still a concept of these folks that could be more easily popped back out of your empire than somewhere else that's more central to you. And it is the case that, yeah, board game cores here are just a permanent, etched into stone part of the table that can't be manipulated. Your national territory is always your national territory from the start to the end of the game. And all of your gains by conquest are not that. They're additional. They're bonus. And yeah, the special cases. Omad and Aden cannot be diplomed with until the Mamelukes are out of the game. Ohio, Hyderabad, Mysore can only be diplomed with if someone has a colony or trade post adjacent to them or within their territory. Siberia can't be diplomed with until period 3. They're out there on the rest of the world map. Mughal, China, Japan, and Nefaud may never be diplomed with ever. They never have a diplomacy marker. And so this line here in the PDF, page 15 of these revised rules, this is the only mention anywhere of Nefaud being an NPC country. It is a region on the rest of the world map. It's the middle of Arabia. And it's mentioned in the definition of what the Middle East is for rules purposes. But nowhere else in the entire text is it brought up. Only here, by implication, is Nefaud maybe defined as a country you could interact with, rather than just a world region. It has its regional stats, but there's no base force for this country that it could mobilize, and as said here, it doesn't have diplomacy values. And in none of the original rules or the 2 expansion packs, which I do have, I have in text. I don't have physical copies of them. Maybe someday I'll go on the hunt for those. Is there any sign that this country exists? This phantom country. I'm not sure why this is here. If it's a mistake, or if this means, is there a secret? This forgotten land. Then yeah, Persia and Mamluk provinces are considered European, even though some of them are located on the world map. Yeah, really you only need to mention Persia here. There are Mamluk provinces on the rest of the world map, in that they are the ones that are the connection points between the world map and the Europe map. All of their stats are on the Europe map. And yes, there are 2 expansions. As we walk out of diplomacy, and I do have a think sheet that I started up for income to look at some income numbers. I could briefly brandish that around. the cash think, while sizable in the magnitude of it, does have some implications. And is itself only some preliminary cash think. There is further drilling down that could be done to think about stuff like manufacturers and, in particular, getting into like comparisons of what different countries' economies do on a given turn and how well their income can be leveraged into like force purchases and so forth. Because that's another way that the countries differentiated from each other for reasons. Alright, so here's cash think. Buckle in, get comfortable. It's time for the economy. So what I've spread out here on this, suppose you have some amount of land income. From $10, you are some sort of smaller than Portugal country, if such a thing can exist. Or all the way up to you are some kind of behemoth who has taken over a third of the board and have $500 of tax base. So there's your land income. There's your 1,500 regular euro trade value. Here's your trade base during peace, when everything is fine. And over here, I used a lot of text to make each of these how much domestic trade income and foreign trade income you are getting at this level of income, based on your DTI 1 to 5 and your FTI 1 to 5. Then I extruded this out into some sample cases. Where, okay, you have 1 1, 1 2, 1 3, 1 4, 1 5, 2 1, 3 1, 4 1, 5 1, 2 2, 3 3, 4 4, 5 5. Using those, I made some graphs. It's graph time again. Here's graph. A sampler of the weirdness, which is in its own way intriguing, of trade income versus land income. Or rather, here I have land income versus total income. Where you can see, so these lines are 1 1, 2 2, 3 3, 4 4, and 5 5. And you can see from the bottom line here, when you are at 1 of either trade index, you do not give a shit about your trade income at all. This is almost a straight line. There's this one hiccup right here when you jump from the less than 100 to 100 or better income bracket. This one tiny plateau. And then otherwise you just kind of keep going in a mostly smooth line. It is always in your interest to just keep adding more land income and not worry about the rest of the world. Rather, the rest of Europe. Maybe you care about the rest of the world. You could be colonizing and still running low trade indexes. But if you are down here at the bottom, just get more land. Just always get more land. Land is what you care about. You kind of shrug off embargoes and don't care about them. Alright, here, now that I'm looking at this graph, let me go ahead and de-embiggen this, slide it up a bit more. Yeah, there you go. There, so you couldn't see that while I was talking about it mostly, but yeah, here's the blue line for bad trade index. You just kind of go for it and don't worry about your trade income whatsoever. But as you move up, though, you can see this hump that emerges. When you go from 80 income to 90 income. Or rather, from 90 to 100? Yeah, 90 to 100. Right here, when you're at high trade index, there is a noticeable drop. This is the moment that you go from having the best foreign trade income bracket to the second best. And that's a 50 ducat shift. That's pretty big. In exchange for the 10 ducats that you just gained in land tax, and the nothing actually at the moment that you just gained in domestic trade. This is a decisive tipping point. If you were, say, Portugal or Venice, but still in a position where you could be taking more land, that land is strictly good for you right up until here. And then you need to kind of stop and think a moment as to if you really want to cross this line. Because you can look over here and see that you don't catch up to this peak until you make it all the way over to like 150, 160. So there is this gap of, that's a lot of land actually, 60 ducats worth of tax base. Of either tax base that you've annexed or like vassals that you've secured. 60 bucks, that's a lot. That's like 1.5 Hungaries. That's a reasonable chunk that you are set back the moment you cross this line. If you were running way up there with high trade indexes, which like Venice can do that almost right away. And you have here, in this little hump, this little indent, here is your incentive to play tall, if you are one of those small countries at the start. And you can see as you move up to a lesser extent, there are these little plateaus that come up. They kind of come up roughly around the 100, 200, and 300 ducat areas. Are these moments where you're taking a step down in foreign income without a matching step up in your land income. It kind of divides your, at least at this basic level, your income brackets into these tiers of small, medium, large, and then big. You are minor, you are moderate, you are hefty or great power. Once you cross the 300 line, you don't care anymore. You are huge and have huge guts. You just keep going. Carrying on steamrolling can only be good for you, and will get increasingly difficult for you, because again, over here, that's 1/3 of the map is under your control. When there are 6 people operating on the board. Back around here is when you have a proportionate amount of the map under your control. And this is the moment when people should be starting to form coalitions to try and knock you down a peg. Like, the economics behind how the Hell War has started is that Spain is, like, somewhere over here. They're on, like, around the middle line for trade indexes. And they are running, like, 300 bucks. Well, they're running, like, 200 something bucks of their direct tax base. Like, 230? 240? Let me go on over to the Grand Campaign. Yeah, initial Spanish tax base is 213. And their initial trade in it, they start at... They actually start at trade index 11. And need to try and buy their way out of that, which they can afford to throw a lot of money into their investments. So initially, Spain is sitting, like, around here. And Spain, as of when we are left off in our holiday hiatus, has, like, managed to gain some indexes and gain some income via vassals, that they're now sitting around here. They're getting close to the line, to the danger zone of, yep, that's 1/6 of the player base with more than 1/6 of the table. You need to cooperate with somebody if you want to take them down. And then the fact that Austria is there giving them a bunch of soldiers that don't cost any money, or land that doesn't pay out money and soldiers that don't cost money, is this further X factor. They have a bunch of phantom heat. Whereas, yeah, let's look over to France. 223 and 11 to start out with. So France is also kind of down here at first. So Spain and France, just going by their tax bases, are of similar weight class. And either of them, the moment they get their hands on some additional revenue, can quickly hit this this feedback point where you just want to keep growing. Spain managed a better launch in our run, and so they built up heat. There is threat behind them. Whereas meanwhile, so let's see, over here yet, the Ottomans start off with the still baffling to me tax base of 92. Although the reasonable trade index is of 32, so you are like around here with the starting Ottoman tax base. Which puts them a bit behind the income of Spain or France. But not astronomically much, because they have the better indexes, which is worth quite a lot when you're down here. In general, having better trade indexes is always good for you in a given situation. The question is, given your trade index, do you want more land right now? And there's just the tooth here that gives you a question about that. And as of the current state of the game, after the couple of annexations I've done, and the tiny bits of investment into the economy that managed to succeed, I have left off now more like up here? Yeah, up at the floating around 300 bucks a turn of income. I could snap open my my own economy sheet and look at it for a second. Yeah, as of some recent turns, land income plus trade income up in that range. Though immediately from looking at this and getting reminded of it, there are a bunch more factors that aren't in this table. Like, this doesn't include trade fleets, monopoly bonuses, trade center control, gold colonies that other people would be getting at right now, colonial income in general, exotic goods. There's a bunch more factors you would look into in building a general profile of how to grow a country and what your return on investment on various moves is. And that would be a good subject to just dive into for a thinking session. This is only the most preliminary of looks at the business numbers. So yeah, meanwhile, say Portugal, though. Tax base of no. Of nope. Of nope, no, nope. Don't, what, okay? Who? Portugal tax base, way the hell down here. Trade index is pretty good, though. You can see that this still means that even though tax base is extremely small, that foreign trade income means that it's not as big of a loss. I want to say I have a copy, I have like a... At some point I took this chart and like quickly roughed up on it drawings of where everybody was as of some point in the campaign or in the start scenario itself. Give me a second to look at my files. Files relating to income think. Might be around here somewhere. If nothing else, it's probably in like the chat history of the Euro game room. Which you can filter for things that have images in them. Which is convenient, because now that just right away gives me everything that we've pasted in. Just do a bit more scrolling here. It'll be in here somewhere. Yeah, here we go. The economy. It's annotated in there in vaguely the country colors of the board game. Yeah, from right to left there. France, Spain, England, Turkey, Venice, and Portugal. With lines also drawn back over to the income scale. So just by these metrics, France is on top for land income at the start. For this combined land trade income, this rough pseudo GDP. Then Spain closely behind, then a ways down England, a further ways down Turkey, then Venice and Portugal, similarly a ways further down. But not too much down? The overall spread there is from like around 110, 120 up to 250. At least for this portion of cash in. Other considerations I had, so this is the like kind of general purpose, you're even-handing working your economy. So here's if your domestic trade was just left in the trash and you only improved your foreign trade index. What is that worth to you? A lot if you are small, and then kind of nothing if you are big. As you'd expect. This makes the teeth much more pronounced and clearly drags out that they happen here, here, and here. And then once you're over that line, it's fine. It's fine. And what about the opposite? What if you don't care about your foreign trade and only invest in domestic? And the answer is domestic becomes more valuable as you scale up to right around here. The moment you're past 250 land income, up in that 260 plus bigness, you're just getting your additional land income, and domestic trade has capped out. It's providing an appreciable margin as it does that, but it's fine. You don't notice too much of a gap when you're moving sideways. It's still always worth it to move up your trade indexes. Trade indexes are powerful. It is weird how tight the starting Ottoman budget is. The comparison you would make is between what they are given at the start versus what they have after cashing in on their quick annexes of the Mamelukes and probably also Hungary. After that, they mostly catch up and end up like, big land power economy-wise. Then they start swinging more like France or Spain. Almost, but not quite. Between that and getting the vassal piles set up. And the fact that their income is going further because a lot of their units are much lower cost for how much raw manpower they are throwing around. That is part of their deal. Part of things that makes it harder to compare these countries because they've been given these extra axes by which they differ. Yeah, that's a bunch of brandishing around the existing work that had been partly assembled. Preliminary thinking routes that can be extended up into further shenanigans. There's a lot to potentially drill down on as part of income think. Like, events, there's a lot going on with the political event table, but in a way where it's difficult to get useful information out of it, which again I do think is to its benefit. Diplomacy, there's very few actual wheels at work here. There's your difficulty of getting influence, and there's your difficulty of activation, but most of how NPC influence ends up being played out and valued, I feel doesn't really happen at this layer. It happens with going and comparing the actual country stats and looking at their positioning and leverage over each other, which would be another topic further down the line. They're kind of intertwined, diplomacy and combat. Diplomacy is another kind of combat. Okay, weird that they would include, like, the sounds that various special attacks make on this OST. Very weird. Let's jump over here. Although I lean into this as, again, I was in the process of starting to wind down, so maybe I don't tease this and just kind of let the silence settle in. There's a lot of subjects that one could try to snap open in having a think about the income phase and then the admin phase, which I think, as has been demonstrated by the way that we kind of play the game in practice, these two are intensely intertwined. These are, like, completely conjoined, income and administration. They're one super phase together. Starting income for the Netherlands might be mentioned down in the Grand Provinces Revolt. I'm not sure it's cleanly put together anywhere. Similarly, I don't think Russia's starting situation is all too cleanly lined out anywhere. Maybe it is. Maybe in major special rules. No, because their starting position is also variable a bit, depending on how events or previous conflicts between players work out. 2 points of cereal manufactory, 1 point of metal. They do get bonus trade index in the rest of the world. Weird. But anyway, economy, income, admin, the economy super phase. That deserves a thinking about. I want to really get my hands on that and split it open. Get that good data. And I think that will be a subject for another time. Just thinking about Europe.